I walked into that courtroom expecting public execution. The flashing cameras, the sneers from my own family, and the smug look on their high-priced lawyer face told me they had already won. They were ready to strip me of my dignity and throw me into a cell for a crime I did not commit. But then Judge Davis lowered his glasses. He looked at the mountain of evidence my parents provided. Then he looked at my brother Marcus, and finally he asked one single question. That question made my father freeze, my brother's smirk vanish, and their shark of a lawyer turn paper white on the spot. It was the moment an 8-year secret finally came to light. My name is Sophia King, and at 34 years old, I am the black sheep of one of Atlanta's most prominent families. My parents are pillars of the church. My brother is the CEO of King Foundations, and I am just the failure who drives a 10-year-old Honda and works data entry. Or at least that is what they think. Before I tell you how I legally dismantled my entire family empire in less than 10 minutes, please let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to let people underestimate you just so you could survive. The nightmare began last Saturday night at the Black Excellence Gala. This was the event of the year in Atlanta. 500 of the city's most influential people were packed into the grand ballroom of the Ritz-Carlton. Crystal chandeliers, heavy velvet curtains, and enough diamonds to pay off the national debt. I did not want to be there. I was wearing a simple black dress I bought off the rack 3 years ago, trying to blend into the wallpaper near the kitchen exit. My mother, heavily adorned in gold and silk, had only invited me because it looked bad for the family image if I was absent. "We are a family of unity," she had hissed at me earlier that day. "Do not embarrass us with your poverty, Sophia. Just sit in the back and clap." At the center table, bathed in the spotlight, sat the golden trio, my father looking dignified in his tuxedo, my mother waving like royalty, and Marcus, my older brother, and the supposed genius behind our family construction business. Next to him sat his wife Ashley. Ashley is the kind of woman who smiles with her mouth but hates you with her eyes. She adjusted her pearls and whispered something to Marcus that made them both look back at me and laugh. I sipped my lukewarm water and checked my watch. I just wanted to go home to my quiet apartment and my real work. But then the music stopped. Marcus stood up, tapping a spoon against his champagne glass. The room went silent. "Thank you all for coming," Marcus announced, his voice smooth and practiced. "Tonight we celebrate not just King Foundations, but the integrity and honesty that my father built this company on. We are a family that believes in truth." The crowd applauded. I felt bile rise in my throat. Integrity. I knew for a fact that Marcus had been gambling away company funds for months. I knew because I was the one who secretly balanced the books from the shadows, fixing his messes so the employees would not lose their jobs. But I stayed silent. I always stayed silent. Suddenly, the heavy double doors at the entrance swung open with a loud bang. The applause died down. 2 uniformed police officers walked in, flanked by a man in a sharp gray suit. I recognized him immediately. Robert Vance, the most aggressive, expensive corporate litigator in the state. I assumed they were there for security or maybe a surprise guest. But they did not head for the stage. They walked straight through the crowd, parting the sea of tuxedos and gowns, heading directly toward the back corner. Toward me. My heart hammered against my ribs. I stood up instinctively. "Sophia King," the lawyer Vance boomed, his voice projecting to every corner of the silent ballroom. "Yes," I stammered. "You are being served with a civil lawsuit and an immediate freezing order on all your assets," Vance announced, handing me a thick stack of papers. The police officers stepped closer, hands on their belts. "What is this?" I asked, my hands trembling as I took the papers. "You are accused of corporate embezzlement, fraud, and theft of trade secrets from King Foundations," Vance said, loud enough for the mayor at the front table to hear. "We have evidence that you have siphoned over $5 million from your family company over the last 5 years." The room gasped. 500 pairs of eyes locked onto me. I felt like the floor was dissolving. 5 million, I whispered. I don't even have $500 in my checking account right now. That is enough, Miss King, one of the officers said. We have orders to escort you off the premises and secure your vehicle as evidence. I looked toward the main table, desperate for help. Dad? Mom? Please tell them this is a mistake, I pleaded. My father stood up. He looked at me with cold, dead eyes. He did not look shocked. He looked satisfied. You broke my heart, Sophia, my father said, his voice trembling with a theatrical sadness that would have won an Oscar. We gave you a job when no one else would, and you stole from us. You stole from your own blood. It was a lie, a complete total fabrication. But before I could defend myself, Ashley stood up. She threw her hands over her mouth and let out a piercing scream. Oh my God, Marcus, she wailed, clinging to my brother. That money, that was for your father's heart surgery fund. She stole the surgery money. The crowd erupted in murmurs of disgust. That is a lie, I shouted, finding my voice. Dad's insurance covers everything. There is no fund. How could you? Sophia Ashley screamed louder, her face turning red. She slumped against Marcus, performing a perfect delicate feint. Marcus caught her looking at me with pure hatred. Get her out of here, Marcus yelled at the police. Get that monster out of my sight before she kills my father with grief. The officers grabbed my arms. They did not handcuff me, but the grip was tight enough to bruise. As they marched me past the tables of people I had known my entire life, I saw the looks on their faces. Disgust, pity, judgment. I was being paraded like a criminal. My reputation, my name, everything was being incinerated in real time. As we reached the doors, I looked back one last time. Ashley had miraculously recovered from her faint and was sipping water. My mother was dabbing dry eyes with a napkin, but it was my father who caught my eye. He raised his glass slightly, just an inch, and smirked. It was a small, almost imperceptible movement, a signal. This was not a misunderstanding. This was an execution. They needed a scapegoat for Marcus's missing millions, and they had decided to sacrifice me. I let the officers push me out into the cool night air. The heavy doors slammed shut behind me, muting the sound of the party resuming. They thought they had won. They thought they had just buried the family failure. As I stood on the curb watching a tow truck back up toward my Honda Civic, I stopped shaking. The fear evaporated, replaced by a cold, sharp clarity. My father thought I was just a data entry clerk. He thought the $5 million was gone. He thought he could use the legal system to crush me. He had no idea that he had just declared war on the actual owner of his company. I reached into my pocket for my phone. My banking app was already showing a locked symbol. My credit cards were dead. They had stripped me of every visible resource I had. But they forgot one thing. I have resources they cannot see. I turned to the officer. Am I under arrest? I asked calmly. Not yet. He grunted. Just detained until we secure the assets. Good, I said. I looked at the Ritz-Carlton looming above me. I took a deep breath. I hope you enjoyed the toast, Marcus, I whispered to the empty street. Because it is the last thing you will ever celebrate. The morning sun did not bring relief, it only illuminated the wreckage of my life. I woke up on the lumpy mattress of my studio apartment with a headache that felt like a jackhammer behind my eyes. For a split second, I thought the events of the gala were just a nightmare, a twisted anxiety dream brought on by stress. But then I looked at my phone. It was glowing with notifications, none of them good. I sat up and tapped on my banking app, needing to see that my small savings account was still safe. I needed to buy groceries. I needed to pay the electric bill. The app loaded, the little wheel spinning, and then a red box flashed across the screen. Account access denied. Contact your financial institution immediately. My stomach dropped. I switched to my checking account. Denied. I tried the credit card I kept for emergencies, the one with a $2,000 limit I had built up over 3 years. Suspended. Panic, cold and sharp, seized my chest. I dialed the bank's customer service number, my fingers trembling so hard I almost dropped the phone. The hold music played for 20 minutes. 20 minutes of me pacing around my tiny apartment, chewing on my fingernail until it bled. When a representative finally answered, her voice was robotic and devoid of empathy. She did not ask for my security questions. She simply told me that an ex parte order had been issued by the Superior Court. King Foundations had filed an emergency motion claiming my assets were the fruit of criminal activity. Every single cent I had earned, every dollar I had scrimped and saved from my data entry jobs was now frozen. I was completely locked out of my own life. I tried to argue. I tried to explain that the money in those accounts was from legitimate paychecks, that I had tax returns to prove it. The woman simply repeated that it was a court order and hung up. I stared at the phone, feeling the walls closing in. I had $40 in cash in my wallet. That was it. That was my entire net worth. Before I could even process the financial suffocation, a heavy fist pounded on my door. It was not a polite knock. It was the kind of banging that demanded entry. I opened it to find Mr. Henderson, my landlord. He was usually a quiet man who kept to himself, but today his face was twisted with anger and disgust. He held up a newspaper. My face was on the front page, right next to a headline that screamed, "Family Betrayal, King Daughter, Accused of Multi-Million-Dollar Theft." Mr. Henderson did not wait for an explanation. He told me to get out. He said he ran a respectable building for honest working people, not for criminals who stole from their own sick fathers. I tried to reason with him. I told him I had paid rent through the end of the month. I told him the newspaper was lying. He didn't care. He said my lease had a clause about criminal conduct and moral turpitude. He said he didn't want the police raiding his property looking for stolen cash. He gave me 1 hour, 60 minutes to pack up my entire existence. I wanted to fight him, to scream about tenant rights, but I knew I had no money for a lawyer and no energy for a battle I could not win today. I scrambled to throw my clothes into heavy-duty garbage bags. I left behind my books. I left behind the small potted plants I had nurtured. I left behind the cheap furniture I had assembled myself. I only took what I could carry. My laptop, my hard drive, and a few changes of clothes. I dragged the bags down the 3 flights of stairs, sweating and struggling under the weight. My neighbors, people I had exchanged polite hellos with for 2 years, peeked out of their doors. They didn't offer to help. They just watched, whispering to each other, their eyes full of judgment. They believed the lie. Everyone believed the lie. When I finally wrestled my belongings onto the sidewalk, I thought I had hit rock bottom. I was wrong. A tow truck was already backing up to my rusty Honda Civic parked on the street. I dropped my bags and ran toward the driver, waving my arms frantically. I screamed at him to stop. That car was 10 years old. The air conditioning didn't work. The bumper was held on by duct tape. It was not a luxury vehicle purchased with embezzled funds. It was a piece of junk, but it was my piece of junk. It was my only way to get around. The driver didn't even look at me. He just hooked up the chain and lifted the front end. He muttered something about a seizure order listed on the VIN number and kept moving. I watched helplessly as my car, my freedom, disappeared around the corner. And then, as if the universe wanted to make the metaphor complete, the sky opened up. It started to rain. It wasn't a gentle drizzle. It was a cold, miserable Atlanta downpour that soaked through my thin denim jacket in seconds. I stood there on the curb, surrounded by black trash bags, shivering and wet. I was homeless. I was penniless. I was footless. I was completely exposed to the elements and the world. My phone rang in my pocket. I pulled it out, wiping the raindrops off the screen. The caller ID flashed, Dad. I stared at the word. Dad. The man who was supposed to protect me. The man who had just orchestrated the systematic destruction of my life. I debated throwing the phone into the gutter, but curiosity, or perhaps a lingering desire for it to be a mistake, made me answer. I didn't say hello. I just put the phone to my ear and listened to the sound of his breathing. It is cold out there, Sophia. His voice came through the speaker, warm and calm, contrasting sharply with the freezing rain running down my neck. He sounded like he was sitting in his leather armchair by the fire. I imagine you are realizing that the real world is quite difficult without the family name to shield you. I said nothing. I just shivered. We can end this, Sophia. He continued, his tone shifting to that of a benevolent negotiator. The lawyers can lift the freeze in an hour. Mr. Henderson can be persuaded to let you back in. You can have your car back. All you have to do is come home. Not to the front door, of course. Come to the back entrance. We have prepared a statement for you. You just need to sign it. You need to admit that you were jealous of Marcus. You need to apologize to your mother. And most importantly, you need to sign the deed transferring your grandmother's land to King Foundations. It is a fair trade, don't you think? Your freedom for a piece of dirt that you don't even use. I closed my eyes. The land. Grandma's land. It was the only thing she had left me, directly bypassing my father. It was a few acres of undeveloped woods on the edge of town. My father had always called it worthless swamp, but now, suddenly, it was the price of my life. I realized then that this wasn't just about Marcus's theft. This was a shakedown. They wanted the land. They probably had a buyer lined up. If I signed, they would pave over Grandma's garden. They would destroy the only legacy that mattered to me. I hate you, I whispered. It was not a scream. It was a statement of fact. Don't be dramatic. He laughed softly. You have 1 hour before we press criminal charges. Think about it. You are wet, you are poor, and you are alone. You have no one, Sophia. You are nothing without us. He hung up. The line went dead. I stood there listening to the relentless rhythm of the rain hitting the pavement. He was right about one thing. I was wet and poor, but he was wrong about the rest. I wasn't alone, and I was definitely not nothing. I looked at my smartphone. They were tracking it. I knew Marcus and his paranoia. He had probably installed spyware on it months ago. I popped the back case off, ripped out the battery, and dropped the pieces into a muddy puddle at my feet. I grabbed my bags and started walking. I walked 3 miles in the pouring rain, my shoes squishing with every step, my hands numb from the cold. I walked until I found a gas station on the edge of a bad neighborhood, the kind of place with bars on the windows. There, attached to a graffiti-covered wall, was a payphone. It was a relic, ancient and rusted, but I prayed it still worked. I dug into my pocket and found the single quarter I had kept for the shopping cart at the grocery store. I inserted the coin and dialed a number I had memorized 8 years ago. I had never dared to call it. I had hoped I would never have to. It rang once, twice, 3 times. A deep voice answered. No greeting, just silence waiting for a code. I took a deep breath, tasting the rain and the grit of the city. My voice was steady, stronger than it had been all day. Activate the Phoenix Protocol, I said. Authentication code Alpha Zulu 904. There was a pause on the other end. A pause that felt like an eternity. Then the voice spoke, calm and professional. Identity confirmed, Miss King. We have been waiting for your call. A car is 3 minutes away. Leave the bags. You won't need them where you are going. I hung up the phone. I looked at the trash bags filled with my old clothes, the last remnants of the Sophia King my family thought they knew. I left them right there on the sidewalk. I straightened my spine and waited for the car that would take me to my true life. The game had just changed. My father wanted a war. He was about to get an apocalypse. The black sedan that picked me up took me to a safe house on the outskirts of the city, a place with heavy curtains and secure locks. I thought I had escaped the immediate danger, but I had underestimated the reach of a woman scorned. I sat on the edge of the unfamiliar bed, the adrenaline of my escape fading into a dull ache when my new burner phone began to vibrate. It was not a call. It was a notification from a social media app I barely used, then another, then 100 more. The phone buzzed so violently it danced across the nightstand. I picked it up, dread pooling in my stomach, and clicked on the link that everyone seemed to be sharing. It was a live stream. The video was titled "The Truth About My Sister-in-Law." There on the small screen sat Ashley. She was sitting in my parents' living room, the lighting perfectly arranged to make her look pale and fragile. She was not wearing her usual designer makeup. Her hair was messy, pulled back in a loose bun, and she was dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. She looked like a grieving angel. "Hi, everyone," Ashley whispered, her voice cracking theatrically. "I did not want to do this. We wanted to handle this privately as a family. But the rumors are getting out of control, and I need to protect my husband and my father-in-law." I watched in horror as the viewer count climbed. 5,000, 10,000, 50,000. Sophia has always been troubled. Ashley continued, looking directly into the camera lens. "We tried to help her. Marcus gave her a job when she was kicked out of college. We paid for her therapy. We thought she was getting better. But addiction is a terrible disease." I gasped. I had never touched drugs in my life. I graduated magna cum laude. This was not just a lie, it was character assassination. She became obsessed with Marcus's success. Ashley sobbed, a single tear tracking down her cheek. She started moving money from the company accounts. At first it was small amounts, but then when we found out Dad needed heart surgery, she emptied the reserve fund. She took the money meant to save her own father's life just to fund her lifestyle. I don't know where she is now, but please, if you see her, tell her we just want her to get help. The comment section was a waterfall of hate. People I went to high school with, people from our church, strangers who did not know me at all, were calling for my head. They called me a monster, a thief, a junkie. I threw the phone onto the bed, feeling like I was going to be sick. Ashley had weaponized the one thing I could not fight with: logic, emotion. She had turned the entire city into her personal army. An hour later, an email pinged into my inbox. It was from the temp agency that managed my cover job as a data entry clerk. "Dear Sophia, due to recent public allegations that violate our code of conduct regarding criminal behavior, we are terminating your contract effective immediately. Please do not return to the office." I laughed, a dry, humorless sound. That job paid $15 an hour. I did not need the money, but I needed the illusion. Being fired meant my cover was blown. It meant that to the world I was now not just a thief but an unemployed thief. My phone chimed again. A text from my cousin Jasmine. "We used to braid each other's hair when we were kids. How could you do this to Uncle Robert? You are dead to us." Then a message from Mrs. Gable, the choir director. "I am praying for your soul, Sophia. Satan has truly taken hold of your heart." I turned the phone off. Silence was the only defense I had left in that moment. I sat in the dark, watching the headlights of passing cars slice through the curtains. I realized then that my financial assets were not the only thing they had frozen. They had frozen my humanity. They had stripped away my history, my relationships, and my reputation, replacing them with a caricature of a villain that suited their narrative. 2 days later, hunger forced me out of the safe house. The pantry was empty, and I needed to eat. I pulled a baseball cap low over my eyes and wore an oversized hoodie, hoping to become invisible. I walked to a discount grocery store 3 blocks away, keeping my head down. The store smelled of bleach and old produce. I grabbed a basket and moved quickly, selecting the cheapest items I could find. A loaf of generic bread, a jar of peanut butter, 6 packets of instant ramen. It was a grim menu for a woman who secretly owned a private equity firm, but I had to play the part. I had to survive on the $40 in my pocket until the Phoenix Protocol unlocked my offshore reserves. I was standing in the aisle comparing the price of 2 cans of beans when I heard a familiar, shrill voice. "Oh my God. Is that her?" I froze. I knew that voice. It was the voice that had narrated my destruction on the internet just 48 hours ago. I slowly turned around. Ashley was standing at the end of the aisle. She was not alone. She was with 2 other women from the church committee, the kind of women who thrived on gossip and judgment. Ashley was wearing a pristine white sundress, looking like the picture of innocence. When she saw me, her eyes lit up with a malicious delight. "It is her," Ashley announced loudly, pointing a manicured finger at me. Shoppers turned to look. The cashier stopped scanning items. The store went quiet. I gripped my basket, my knuckles turning white. I just wanted to buy my beans and leave. I tried to walk past her, keeping my eyes on the floor. "Excuse me," I muttered. Ashley stepped in front of me, blocking my path. "You have some nerve showing your face in public," she spat, her voice echoing off the linoleum floor. "After what you did to Marcus? After you almost killed your father?" "Please, Ashley," I said, my voice low. "I just want to buy some food." "Food?" Ashley laughed, looking at the women beside her for validation. "You are buying food with stolen money. That is my husband's hard-earned money in your pocket." "I am using change I found in my couch," I said through gritted teeth. "Let me pass." Ashley looked at my basket. She saw the ramen, the cheap bread, the beans. A cruel smirk spread across her face. "Look at this," she announced to the store. "The great embezzler. Eating trash like the rat she is." She reached out and shoved my basket. It happened in slow motion. The basket flew from my hands. The jar of peanut butter shattered on the floor. The ramen packets scattered like confetti. The can of beans rolled away, stopping at the feet of a shocked elderly woman. My food, my survival, spilled across the dirty floor. Ashley stood over the mess, looking triumphant. "Oops," she said, her voice dripping with fake apology. "I guess you are clumsy too. Or maybe you are just high." "Are you high right now, Sophia?" A few people in the store chuckled. Someone took out their phone and started recording. I could feel the heat rising in my cheeks, the humiliation burning my skin. This was what she wanted. She wanted me to scream. She wanted me to attack her so she could have more content for her next video. She wanted the monster she had created to come to life. I looked down at the broken glass and the peanut butter. I looked at the ramen noodles that I would not be eating tonight. Then I looked up at Ashley. Something inside me shifted. The shame evaporated, replaced by a cold, hard resolve. I saw her for what she was. Not a powerful adversary, but a desperate, greedy woman who was playing checkers while I was playing three-dimensional chess. I did not scream. I did not cry. I stepped over the mess she had made and closed the distance between us until I was inches from her face. She flinched, expecting a blow. I lowered my voice, so only she could hear, though the intensity of my words made her stiffen. "You enjoy this, Ashley. You enjoy the likes and the comments and the pity." "I am just telling the truth," she hissed, though her eyes darted nervously to the phone recording us. I smiled. It was not a nice smile. "Here is some truth for you," I whispered. "You see that mess on the floor? That is exactly what your life is going to look like in about 2 weeks. "Are you threatening me?" she asked loudly, trying to regain the audience. "No," I said calmly, stepping back. "I am giving you financial advice." I gestured to the receipt sticking out of her designer purse. "You should keep that receipt for the wine you just bought Ashley, and the receipt for that dress, and every other receipt for every dollar you spend from today forward." "Why?" she scoffed. "Because," I said, my voice carrying clearly through the silent store. "When the forensic auditors are done with Marcus, and when the IRS finishes with you, you are going to need every single scrap of paper to prove you did not spend my money. You are going to need those receipts to fill out your bankruptcy filing." Ashley's mouth fell open. The color drained from her face. She didn't know how I knew about the tax evasion, but the fear in her eyes told me I had hit a nerve. I turned to the cashier, who was watching with wide eyes. "I am sorry about the mess," I said politely. "Put it on her tab. She owes me $5 million anyway." I walked out of the store empty-handed but head high. I could hear Ashley screaming insults behind me, but they sounded distant, like the buzzing of a dying fly. I was hungry, yes, but I was no longer afraid. Let them have their internet fame. I had work to do. The email from Robert Vance arrived at precisely 9 in the morning. The subject line was simple: settlement opportunity. It was a summons disguised as an olive branch, an invitation to the lion's den, where they hoped to devour what was left of me. I arrived at the glass skyscraper in downtown Atlanta, wearing the same oversized hoodie and jeans I had worn to the grocery store. I wanted them to see a defeated woman. I wanted them to see a desperate daughter ready to beg. The receptionist looked at my sneakers with disdain before buzzing me through the heavy oak doors of the conference room. They were all there, arranged like a tableau of disappointed royalty. My father sat at the head of the table looking grave and weary, as if my existence was a burden he could barely carry. My mother sat to his right, clutching a handkerchief, her eyes already red and puffy. Marcus sat opposite them, drumming his fingers on the mahogany table, radiating a nervous, aggressive energy. And standing by the window looking out at the city he thought he owned was Robert Vance. Vance turned as I entered. He did not offer me a seat. He simply slid a thick leather binder across the polished table. It stopped inches from my hand. "Have a seat." Sophia Vance said, his voice smooth like oil. "We are all here because despite everything your family loves you. They want to avoid a messy trial. They want to give you a chance to redeem yourself." I pulled out a chair and sat down. I did not look at my family. I focused entirely on the binder. "What is this?" I asked, keeping my voice small and trembling. "It is a path forward," Vance said. "A confession of guilt and a repayment plan." I opened the binder. The first page was an admission of liability, stating that I, Sophia King, had embezzled $5 million from King Foundations to fund a gambling addiction and a lavish lifestyle. It was fiction, pure and simple. But it was the next few pages that made my blood run cold. The terms of the settlement were medieval. Clause 1. I would work for King Foundations for a period of 10 years as an administrative assistant, with my wages garnished to minimum wage, the rest going toward restitution. Clause 2. I would be subjected to weekly drug tests and financial audits. Clause 3. And this was the one they really wanted. I would immediately sign over the deed to the 12 acres of undeveloped land inherited from my grandmother Dorothy King. I read the terms in silence. 10 years of slavery, the loss of my grandmother's legacy, and a permanent criminal record suspended only by their grace. "Mom," I whispered, looking up at her, "is this what you want?" My mother let out a sob that sounded practiced. She reached across the table trying to take my hand, but I pulled it back. "Oh, Sophia," she wailed, "I am so heartbroken. Where did we go wrong with you? We gave you everything. Private schools, a safe home, our name, and you throw it all away for greed." She dabbed her eyes, looking at my father for approval. "We are doing this to save you," she continued, her voice dropping to a theatrical whisper. "If you go to prison, you will die in there. You are not strong enough. This agreement keeps you home. It keeps you under our roof, where we can fix you." "Fix me," I repeated. "You are broken, Sophia." My father said, his voice hard. "You have always been broken. Jealous of Marcus. Jealous of our success. This is your chance to be useful. Sign the papers. Give us the land. Start paying back what you stole." Marcus leaned forward, a cruel smirk playing on his lips. "Do it, Sophia," he sneered. "It is better than you deserve. Honestly, if it were up to me, I would let you rot in a cell. But Mom has a soft spot for charity cases." I looked at Marcus. I looked at his expensive watch, the custom-tailored suit that cost more than my first car. I looked at the sweat beading on his upper lip despite the air conditioning. He was terrified. He was pushing so hard because he needed this to end today. I looked back down at the binder. Behind the legal agreement there were attached exhibits, financial records, bank statements, the fabricated evidence they planned to use against me in court. They had included it to intimidate me, to show me how thorough their frame job was. I turned the page, then another. My eyes scanned the rows of numbers. To anyone else, these were just columns of expenses, materials, labor, consulting fees. But to me, a woman who had spent the last decade hunting down financial discrepancies for Fortune 500 companies, it was a map. I stopped at page 4. The room was silent. They were waiting for me to pick up the pen. They were waiting for the surrender. I stared at the entry on May 12th. It was listed as a payment to a shell company for structural steel, $200,000. I looked at the date again, May 12th. I remembered that day. It was the day of the Kentucky Derby. Sophia Vance said sharply. The pen is right there. Stop stalling. I did not reach for the pen. Instead, I reached for the glass of water in front of me and took a slow, deliberate sip. The trembling in my hands was gone. The numbers are wrong, I said softly. What did you say? Marcus snapped. I looked up, meeting his eyes. My expression was no longer that of a scared victim. It was the look of an auditor who had just found the smoking gun. I pointed to the line on page 4. Here, I said, my voice steady and clear. You have listed a $200,000 expense on May 12th for structural steel reinforcements for the Midtown project. So what? Marcus said, his face flushing red. Steel is expensive. You wouldn't know that since you have never run a real business. True, I said. But I do know that on May 12th, the Midtown project was on a work stoppage because of rain. No deliveries were accepted that week. I leaned forward. And I also know that $200,000 is the exact amount of the buy-in for the VIP high roller table at the Golden Chip Online Casino. The room went deathly quiet. Vance stopped pacing. My father frowned. What are you talking about? My father demanded. I am talking about the fact that this money didn't go to a steel supplier, Dad, I said, keeping my eyes locked on Marcus. It went to an offshore account in the Cayman Islands that Marcus uses to fund his gambling habit. I bet if we subpoena the IP address for that transaction, it will match the Wi-Fi right here in this office. Marcus stood up so fast his chair flew back and hit the wall. You lying witch! He screamed. He lunged across the table. His hand grabbed the collar of my hoodie, bunching the fabric tight against my throat. He raised a fist, his face twisted in a primal rage. Marcus, sit down! Vance shouted, rushing forward. My mother screamed. My father just sat there, mouth open. I did not flinch. I did not struggle. I looked straight into my brother's wild eyes. Go ahead, Marcus, I whispered. Hit me. Do it right here in front of your lawyer. Add assault to the list of felonies you are racking up. Marcus froze. His fist hovered in the air. He was breathing hard, shaking with adrenaline. He realized where he was. He realized that Vance, an officer of the court, was watching. He slowly lowered his hand and shoved me back into my chair. She is lying. Dad. Marcus panted, adjusting his suit jacket. She is just trying to confuse you. It is a desperate tactic. I smoothed out my hoodie. I stood up slowly. I closed the binder and slid it back toward Vance. I am not signing that, I said. Sophia. Please, my mother sobbed, but the performance was losing its steam. No, Mom, I said. I am done playing the villain in your little play. I walked to the door. My hand hovered over the handle. I turned back to look at them one last time. You brought me here to trap me, I said. You thought I was a cornered animal, but you forgot one thing about animals, Marcus. They bite back. You have nothing. Marcus spat. You are homeless. You are broke. You are nobody. I smiled. It was a cold, dangerous smile. Keep telling yourself that, brother. But a word of advice. Don't bet on the ponies this weekend. You are going to need that cash for bail. I walked out of the conference room and let the heavy door slam shut behind me. As I walked past the receptionist, I pulled a small, hidden voice recorder from my pocket and clicked the stop button. I had the offer. I had the blackmail attempt. And I had Marcus losing control when confronted with the truth. I stepped into the elevator and watched the numbers go down. I was still broke. I was still being sued. But now I had the first drop of blood, and sharks can smell blood from miles away. I left the mediation room with a sense of grim satisfaction, but I knew I had just backed a pair of dangerous animals into a corner. Marcus was volatile and not particularly bright, but Ashley possessed a cunning sort of desperation that terrified me. I knew they would not just sit back and wait for me to expose the gambling debts. They needed to destroy my credibility before I could use the recording I had just made. I underestimated just how far they were willing to go. I thought we were playing a game of chess involving financial records and reputations. I did not realize they had decided to burn the entire board. I was staying at the Starlight Motel on the edge of the city, a place where the neon sign buzzed incessantly and the locks were merely suggestions. It was the only place that would take cash without a credit card hold. I spent the next 48 hours working on the Phoenix Protocol, organizing the forensic trail that would exonerate me. I was careful. I used a burner laptop for my real work. But I had made one critical error. I still had my old laptop, the gray Dell I had used for my data entry job and for family business for years. It was sitting on the nightstand connected to the motel Wi-Fi. I did not think it mattered. It was just a machine. I did not know that across town in the pristine office of a private security firm my brother and his wife were meeting with a man who did not exist on any official payroll. They paid him $10,000 in cash money Marcus had likely pawned his watch to get. The job was simple, but devastating. They did not just want to find evidence, they wanted to create it. While I slept that night exhausted from the stress, a remote access Trojan was activated on my old laptop. It was a backdoor I had installed myself years ago to help my father with his email, a backdoor I had forgotten to close. The hacker spent 3 hours planting a digital narrative that was horrifyingly convincing. He created a folder deep in the system files, labeled distinctively. Inside, he drafted dozens of emails addressed to a fictional foreign partner named Oleg in Estonia. The emails were detailed. They discussed structuring deposits to avoid IRS detection. They referenced the exact amounts that were missing from King Foundations. They even included fake wire transfer confirmations that looked identical to the ones used by major international banks. By the time the sun came up, my old laptop was no longer a tool for work. It was a smoking gun loaded with my fingerprints. The wake-up call came at 4 in the morning. There was no knock this time. The door to room 104 simply exploded inward with a deafening crash. I bolted upright, blinded by the tactical flashlights mounting the barrels of assault rifles. Men in body armor swarmed the tiny room, screaming conflicting commands. Get on the ground. Hands where I can see them. Do not move. I was thrown onto the threadbare carpet, my cheek pressed against the grit and dust. I felt the cold steel of handcuffs ratcheting tight around my wrists, tighter than before. This was not a civil dispute anymore. This was a felony raid. Secure the device, a detective shouted. I watched sideways as a gloved hand grabbed the old Dell laptop from the nightstand. They bagged it instantly. They did not touch the burner laptop hidden under the mattress. They knew exactly what they were looking for. They knew exactly where it was. That was when the cold realization washed over me. This was a setup, a perfectly choreographed hit. I was dragged out of the motel in my pajamas, paraded past the flashing blue lights. The neighbors were watching again, confirming every lie Ashley had told on the internet. I was processed at the county jail, fingerprinted and thrown into a holding cell that smelled of bleach and despair. I sat there for hours shivering, waiting for someone to tell me what was happening. Finally, the heavy steel door buzzed open. A man walked in looking harried and exhausted. He wore a suit that was 2 sizes too big and had a mustard stain on the lapel. He carried a file that was already overflowing with papers. This was Gary, the public defender assigned to my case because my assets were frozen and I could not afford private counsel. Gary did not sit down. He threw the file onto the metal table between us. The sound echoed in the small room. You are in deep trouble, Sophia, Gary said, rubbing his eyes. I have seen bad cases, but this is a disaster. I didn't do it. I said, my voice hoarse. Gary laughed, a dry, cynical sound. Everyone didn't do it. But the district attorney just sent over the preliminary forensics on your laptop. They found the emails, Sophia. Dozens of them. You were laundering money through shell companies in Estonia. Really? That is federal wire fraud. That is 20 years in federal prison. I stared at him. Estonia. I had never even been to Europe. I never wrote those emails, I insisted. They were planted. My brother hired someone. Gary sighed and leaned against the wall. Look, the timestamps match the times your computer was active. The IP address matches your location. The prose style matches your other documents. It is a slam dunk for the prosecution. They are going to paint you as a mastermind who got greedy. He leaned in closer. Here is the deal. The DA is offering a plea because they want to wrap this up quickly for the press. You plead guilty to 1 count of fraud. You serve 5 years. You pay restitution. You get out while you are still young enough to start over. If you go to trial, they will bury you. They will give you 20 years, Sophia. Take the deal. I looked at the plea agreement he slid across the table. It was an admission of guilt. If I signed it, Marcus won. Ashley won. My parents won. I would be the criminal they said I was, and they would keep their stolen empire. I closed my eyes. I thought about the land. I thought about the smirk on Marcus's face. I thought about the peanut butter on the floor of the grocery store. No, I said. Sophia, be reasonable, Gary groaned. I have 50 other cases on my desk. I cannot win this for you. The evidence is overwhelming. You have no money for experts. You have no money for a real defense. You are alone. I stood up. The chair scraped loudly against the concrete floor. I am firing you, Gary. He blinked, surprised. You can't fire me. I am free. You can't afford anyone else. I didn't say I was hiring anyone else, I lied. I just said, I am firing you. Get out. Gary shook his head, picked up his briefcase, and walked to the door. You are making a mistake. A fatal mistake. As the door opened to let Gary out, a commotion in the hallway made him stop. A man was arguing with the guard. I am telling you, my bicycle is a vintage Schwinn. I cannot just leave it chained to the hydrant, the man was saying. His voice was calm, but carried an authority that cut through the noise of the jail. I peered past Gary. The man looked like a disheveled history professor. He was wearing a rumpled beige raincoat over a sweater vest. His hair was gray and unruly, sticking up in tufts as if he had just woken up. He was holding a bicycle helmet in one hand and a battered leather satchel in the other. He looked like he had wandered into the jail looking for a library. He saw me looking and smiled. It was a sharp, predatory smile that did not match his outfit at all. Excuse me, are you Sophia King? The man asked, pushing past the confused guard and the stunned public defender. Yes, I said. Excellent, the man said, walking into the cell and dumping his helmet on the table. He looked at Gary. You must be the public defender. You can go now. I will be taking over as lead counsel. Gary scoffed. And who are you? Some pro bono charity caseworker? The man adjusted his glasses and looked at Gary with eyes that were suddenly cold and hard as flint. My name is Elias Thorne. Gary's jaw dropped. The color drained from his face instantly. He looked from the disheveled man to me and back again. Elias Thorne, Gary stammered. The Elias Thorne? The former U.S. attorney for the Southern District. The one who took down the cartel in '99. That would be me, Elias said pleasantly, opening his satchel. Although I prefer to think of myself as semi-retired these days. Now, unless you want to stay and take notes on how to actually defend a client, I suggest you leave. Gary scrambled out of the room so fast he almost tripped. The door clanged shut, leaving me alone with the man who looked like a vagrant, but commanded fear like a general. Elias Thorne looked at me. He pulled a sandwich out of his pocket and took a bite. Your grandmother Dorothy was a hell of a poker player, he said, chewing thoughtfully. She called me 3 years ago. She said her granddaughter might need a shark one day, but that the shark should look like a goldfish. She paid my retainer in full. He tossed a file onto the table. It landed on top of the plea deal. I reviewed the evidence they planted, Elias said. It is good work, very detailed. But they made one mistake. What mistake, I asked, feeling the first glimmer of hope I had felt in days. They time-stamped the emails for last night, Elias said. But they forgot that the Starlight Motel had a power outage between 2 and 4 in the morning due to the storm. Your router was dead. You couldn't have sent an email to Estonia if you wanted to. He smiled again, and this time it looked like a wolf baring its teeth. They walked right into the trap, Sophia. Now let's go make them regret they ever learned how to use a computer. I was sitting in a diner booth across from Elias Thorne reviewing the forensic accounting strategy when my phone rang. It was my mother. I hesitated. Elias shook his head slowly, warning me not to answer, but the persistent buzzing felt like a physical pull. I slid the answer button. Before I could say a word, a scream pierced my ear. It was a sound of raw, guttural agony that made the hair on my arms stand up. "Your father!" My mother shrieked, her voice breaking into hysterical sobs. He collapsed, Sophia. His heart stopped. "The doctors are working on him now. You killed him. You finally killed him." The phone slipped from my hand and clattered onto the table. The world tilted on its axis. In that moment, the lawsuit, the embezzlement accusations, and the fake emails vanished. All I could see was my father, the man who taught me to ride a bike, the man whose approval I had spent 34 years chasing, lying cold on a gurney. Elias grabbed my wrist as I scrambled to stand up. He told me it was a trap. He told me that narcissists use health scares as a weapon when they are losing control. But I could not listen. The conditioning ran too deep. I pulled away from my lawyer and ran out of the diner. I drove to the hospital in a trance, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. When I sprinted into the waiting room of the cardiac wing, I hit a wall of hostility so thick it was suffocating. It seemed like half the congregation of Greater Ebenezer Baptist Church was there. My aunts, my cousins, the deacons, people I had known my entire life. They were huddled in small prayer circles, but when they saw me, the praying stopped. The silence was deafening. Aunt Sarah, my father's oldest sister, stepped forward. She was a large woman who usually greeted me with a warm hug. Today, she looked at me with pure venom. "You have some nerve showing your face here," she hissed, blocking my path to the double doors. "He is in there fighting for his life, because his heart could not take the shame you brought on this family." I tried to step around her. "Aunt Sarah, please, I just want to see him." "You want to see what?" Aunt Sarah shouted, causing a nurse at the station to look up. "You want to see the machine breathing for him. You want to finish the job. You are a selfish, ungrateful child. We always knew you were jealous of Marcus, but we never thought you were evil." I shrank back. The words cut deeper than any legal threat. I looked around the room, begging for a friendly face. I saw my cousin Jasmine, the one who had texted me earlier. She turned her back on me. I saw Deacon Miller shaking his head in disgust. I was completely alone in a room full of my blood relatives. Then the double doors swung open, and Pastor Jenkins walked out. He was a tall man with silver hair and a deep baritone voice that commanded authority. He was holding a Bible against his chest. He saw the commotion and walked straight to me. He did not yell. His approach was softer, more insidious. He placed a heavy hand on my shoulder. "Sister Sophia," he said, his voice dripping with disappointed solemnity. "I have just prayed over your father. His spirit is restless. He is holding on to so much pain. Is he going to be okay?" I asked, tears streaming down my face. "That depends on the Lord," Pastor Jenkins said, looking deep into my eyes. "But the Bible tells us to honor our father and mother so that our days may be long. Right now, your father is suffering because there is unfinished business. He is worried about the legacy. He is worried about the company." He leaned closer, lowering his voice so only I could hear. "If you want him to find peace, if you want God to spare him today, you need to unburden his heart. Your mother says there are papers you refuse to sign, papers that would secure the family's future. Sophia, do not let your pride be the reason your father leaves this earth today. Go in there, repent, and sign the papers. Give him that peace. The guilt crashed over me like a tidal wave. Maybe Elias was wrong. Maybe I was the villain. If my father died thinking I hated him, I would never forgive myself. The land, the money, the reputation, none of it mattered if I had blood on my hands. I nodded, wiping my face with my sleeve. I told the pastor I would do it. I would sign whatever they wanted. I just wanted my dad back. Pastor Jenkins nodded gravely and stepped aside. Go to him, he said. I walked down the sterile hallway, my legs feeling like lead. I clutched my bag, which contained a pen. I was ready to surrender. I was ready to give up the fight, give up the Phoenix Protocol, give up everything just to stop the pain. I reached room 304. The door was slightly ajar. I raised my hand to push it open, but a sound from inside made me freeze. It was laughter. It was not the soft, relieved laughter of a family rejoicing in a recovery. It was a sharp, mocking cackle. I recognized it immediately. It was Marcus. I told you she would come running, Marcus said. She is so predictable. One phone call from Mom, and she probably ran red lights to get here. Then I heard another voice. A voice that was supposed to be weak, gasping, and fighting for life. My father's voice. It was strong and clear. Did you see how fast the pastor got on board? My father chuckled. Jenkins is worried that if the company goes under, his tithes will dry up. He put the fear of God in her for sure. I stood paralyzed outside the door. My hand hovered inches from the wood. Is the lawyer ready? My father asked. Yeah, Marcus replied. Vance is waiting in the cafeteria. As soon as she signs the transfer for the land and the confession, he will notarize it. But what about the criminal charges? My father asked. We promised her we would drop them if she signed. Marcus laughed again, a cruel sound that turned my blood to ice. Dad, come on, we can't drop the charges. We need someone to take the fall for the audit. Once she signs the confession to save your life, we just hand that confession straight to the district attorney. She goes to prison for 5 years, we get the land, and we get the insurance payout for employee theft. It is a win-win. My father was silent for a moment. I held my breath, hoping, praying for a shred of hesitation, a tiny piece of paternal instinct. She is going to be devastated, my father said. She will survive, Marcus scoffed. She is tough. Besides, she owes us. We raised her. You are right. My father sighed, the sound of a man settling comfortably into his hospital bed. She is a sacrifice we have to make. Now hand me that water. My throat is dry from all that wheezing I had to do for the nurses. The world stopped spinning. The tears on my face dried instantly, replaced by a heat so intense I thought I might burst into flames. The grief I had felt moments ago evaporated. The guilt vanished. In their place, a cold, diamond-hard resolve settled in my chest. They were not just stealing from me. They were not just lying. They were planning to imprison me. They were laughing about sending their own daughter, their sister, to a cage for 5 years, just to cover their own incompetence and greed. I looked down at the bouquet of flowers I had grabbed from the hospital gift shop on my way in. White chrysanthemums. In many cultures, they are used for funerals. It was fitting, because the father I thought I had just died in that room. I took a deep breath. I smoothed my hair. I adjusted my jacket. I did not barge in screaming. I did not kick the door down. That is what the old Sophia would have done. The new Sophia, the owner of Phoenix Holdings, walked in with the grace of an executioner. I pushed the door open. The scene inside was almost comical. My father, who had just been laughing, instantly threw his head back against the pillows, clutching his chest and letting out a weak groan. Marcus, who had been sitting on the edge of the bed, jumped up and arranged his face into a mask of concern. Sophia, Marcus whispered, his voice trembling. Thank God you are here. He is fading. My father opened one eye, looking at me with a tragic expression. Daughter, he wheezed. You came. I stood at the foot of the bed. I did not move closer. I stared at them, letting the silence stretch until it became uncomfortable. "I brought you flowers, Dad," I said, my voice flat and devoid of emotion. I tossed the white chrysanthemums onto his chest. They landed with a soft thud. He flinched. A dying man does not flinch. "Did you bring the papers?" my father rasped, ignoring the flowers. "I just want peace before I go." I looked at Marcus. I looked at the heart monitor, which was beeping a steady, strong rhythm. "I heard the doctor is amazing here," I said calmly. "He must be a miracle worker. Because 5 seconds ago I heard you laughing about how you were going to use my confession to send me to prison after I signed over Grandma's land." The color drained from Marcus's face. My father sat up, forgetting to wheeze. "Sophia, wait," Marcus stammered. "You misunderstood." "No, I don't think I did," I said. "I think I understood perfectly for the first time in my life. You are not sick, Dad. You are just sick in the head." I pulled out my phone. "I suggest you check out soon," I said. "Because insurance fraud is another felony, and I would hate for them to add it to your list before I do." I turned to leave. "If you walk out that door, you are dead to this family," my father shouted, his voice booming with its usual strength, the heart attack completely forgotten. I stopped. I didn't turn around. "I was dead to you the moment I was born," I said. "I was just a spare part, but guess what? The spare part just became the engine." I walked out of the room, past the stunned pastor, past Aunt Sarah, past the weeping cousins. I walked straight out of the hospital into the bright sunlight. I didn't cry. I pulled out my burner phone and dialed Elias. "Put the pedal to the floor, Elias," I said. "Destroy them." Walking out of that hospital room was the emotional severing, but the next morning marked the beginning of the surgical removal. I met Elias Thorne at his makeshift office, which was actually the back room of a 24-hour laundromat. It smelled of detergent and stale coffee, but to me it smelled like justice. Elias was wearing a different sweater vest today, this one with a hole in the shoulder, but his eyes were sharp as he drafted the discovery motion. We were not just asking for a few bank statements. We demanded the last 10 years of tax returns, general ledgers, vendor contracts, and internal communication logs for King Foundations. When the request hit Robert Vance's desk, I imagine he laughed. In the legal world, discovery is often used as a weapon of attrition. The side with the most money usually wins because they can afford to drown the opposition in paperwork. 2 days later, a white delivery van pulled up to the curb outside the laundromat. 2 men in jumpsuits unloaded 50 banker boxes heavy with paper. They stacked them against the washing machines, blocking the view of the dryers. Vance had sent over 100,000 pages of documents. It was a classic defense tactic known as paper burying. Instead of just sending the relevant financial records, they had included everything. There were lunch receipts from 2014. There were printed emails about the office holiday party. There were drafts of brochures that were never published. They had taken the needle we were looking for and thrown it into a haystack the size of a mountain. A courier handed me a note from Vance attached to the top box. It read simply, "Good luck finding anything before the trial date." Elias kicked one of the boxes. "They expect you to quit," he said, popping a breath mint. "They know you cannot afford a team of paralegals to sift through this garbage. A standard review of this much material would cost $50,000 and take months. We have 3 weeks." I ran my hand along the cardboard edge of the nearest box. I felt a vibration of excitement that I had not felt in years. Marcus and Vance thought they were burying me. They thought they were giving me an impossible task. They did not know that for the last 8 years, this was exactly what I did for a living. I was not just a data entry clerk. I was a ghost auditor. Major corporations hired me when they suspected internal fraud, but did not want to alert their shareholders. I had spent thousands of hours in windowless rooms just like this one, finding the single transposed number that revealed $1 million theft. "They didn't bury me," I said to Elias. a small smile playing on my lips. They just sent me the ammunition. I moved the boxes into the small back office. I pushed the desk against the wall. I set up my lamp. I brewed a pot of coffee strong enough to wake the dead, and then I went to work. For the next 72 hours, I did not leave that room. I did not sleep. I barely ate. I entered what I call the zone. To most people, a spreadsheet is just a wall of numbers. To me, it is a symphony. It has a rhythm and a flow. When money moves legally, it follows a predictable tempo. When money is being stolen, the rhythm breaks. It stutters. I started with the vendor lists. I scanned thousands of invoices, my eyes moving down the pages faster than most people can read a novel. I tossed aside the lunch receipts and the utility bills. I was looking for patterns. I was looking for the ghost in the machine. Meanwhile, across town, I knew exactly what Marcus was doing. He was probably sitting in his leather chair, pouring a drink and laughing with Ashley. They would be telling each other that I was drowning in paper. They would be betting on how long it would take before I called begging to take the plea deal. They thought that without money I was powerless. They forgot that knowledge is the only currency that actually matters. By the second night, my eyes were burning and my back ached, but I did not stop. I had separated the documents into 3 piles: legitimate expenses, questionable expenses, and the red flag pile. The red flag pile was growing. I noticed an anomaly in the fiscal year of 2018. It was small at first: a monthly payment of $9,500 for consulting services. It was just under the $10,000 limit that triggers an automatic banking report. It was smart, but it was lazy. I traced the vendor name: Zenith Consulting. It sounded professional. It sounded legitimate. But when I cross-referenced the address on the invoice with the vendor master file, I found a match that made my heart race. The address for Zenith Consulting was a mailbox at a shipping center in a strip mall 3 towns over. A multi-million-dollar construction company does not hire high-level consultants who work out of a shipping center. I pulled every invoice from Zenith Consulting. I laid them out on the floor like a mosaic. The dates were irregular, but the amounts were always just under the reporting threshold. May 12th, June 14th, July 20th. Then I saw it. The signature approval on the invoices. Usually Marcus signed everything with a large flamboyant scrawl, but these invoices were initialed by someone else. A small, jagged MK. I dug deeper. I went back to the tax returns Vance had sent, thinking I would never look at them closely. I found a deduction for bad debt written off to a company called Shell Corp A in the internal ledger. It was a placeholder name, a dummy variable used by accountants when they are setting up a new vendor profile. I cross-referenced Shell Corp A with the bank transfers. The money flowed out of King Foundations into Zenith Consulting, and then it vanished. But money never truly vanishes. It just changes shape. I grabbed the stack of emails they had included, the ones they thought were useless junk. I searched for mentions of Zenith. Nothing. I searched for the address. Nothing. Then I searched for the dates. I found an email from Ashley to Marcus dated the same day as the first large transfer to Zenith. The subject line was simply vacation. The body of the email was empty, but there was an attachment: a brochure for a luxury villa in the Cayman Islands. I went back to the ledgers. I looked at the total amount paid to Zenith Consulting over 5 years. It was not random. It matched almost to the penny the deficits in the project budgets that I had been blamed for. I sat back in my chair, my hands covered in dust and printer ink. The room was silent save for the hum of the refrigerator. I held the invoice in my hand. It was just a piece of paper, but it was heavy with the weight of my vindication. Zenith Consulting was not a consultant. Zenith was a funnel, and I knew exactly who was holding the bucket at the other end. I picked up my phone and took a picture of the document. I sent it to Elias with a 3-word caption: I found it. I stood up and stretched, hearing my spine crack. I walked to the window and looked out at the street lights. Marcus thought he had buried me in paper. He thought he had hidden his crimes in a mountain of boredom. But he had forgotten the first rule of accounting. The numbers never lie. People do. I looked at the invoice again. I circled the name Zenith Consulting with a red marker. This was the key. This was the loose thread that would unravel their entire tapestry of lies. And I was going to pull it until everything they had built came crashing down around their ankles. I turned off the lamp, leaving the room in darkness, except for the streetlight illuminating that single circled name. The hunt was over. The slaughter was about to begin. I sat in the dim light of the laundromat back office, staring at the invoice on my screen. Zenith Consulting had billed King Foundation's $45,000 on February 14th. The line item description was vague, merely stating project management services. But I knew better. I cross-referenced the transaction ID with the credit card merchant codes I had scraped from the bank data. The merchant code did not belong to a consulting firm. It belonged to Tiffany and Company. Marcus had bought a diamond ring for his mistress using company funds and disguised it as a business expense. He was not just a thief, he was a sloppy thief. I knew exactly who the mistress was. Her name was Chloe, a 22-year-old hostess at the casino where Marcus blew the family fortune. I had photos of them together thanks to a private investigator I had hired briefly 3 months ago. I looked at the picture of the invoice, then at the picture of the ring. I felt a cold surge of adrenaline. It was time to introduce a little chaos into the enemy ranks. I created a new anonymous email account. I attached the invoice. I attached the credit card receipt showing the Tiffany merchant code. And just for good measure, I attached a photo of Chloe wearing a ring that looked suspiciously identical to the one on the receipt. I typed a single line in the subject field. He is spending your inheritance on her. I typed Ashley's email address into the recipient bar. My finger hovered over the enter key. I took a sip of stale coffee and pressed send. Across town in the polished glass executive suites of King Foundations, Ashley was likely sipping a latte and planning her next interview to slander me. I imagined the notification pinging on her phone. I imagined her manicured fingers sliding across the screen. I imagined the moment her heart stopped. I did not have to imagine for long. According to the text update I received from a sympathetic receptionist named Brenda, who I had helped out of a financial jam years ago, the explosion was immediate. Ashley did not just get angry, she went nuclear. Brenda texted me that she heard a scream from the executive wing that sounded like an animal in a trap. Then came the sound of shattering glass. Ashley had stormed into Marcus's office while he was on a conference call with the bank trying to beg for a loan extension. She didn't care about the bank. She didn't care about the staff listening outside. She threw her phone at him, hitting him square in the chest. "You lying piece of garbage!" Ashley screamed, her voice echoing through the entire floor. "You told me that $45,000 was for the lumber supplier. You told me we were tight on cash because of Sophia, but you bought her a ring. You bought that cocktail waitress a ring with my money." Marcus tried to hush her up. He tried to close the door, but Ashley kicked it open. She started grabbing things off his desk. The Crystal Award for Business of the Year, the framed photo of the two of them. She threw them against the wall, smashing them into jagged shards. "I stood by you," she shrieked, tears streaming down her face, ruining her perfect makeup. "I lied for you. I went on television and destroyed your sister's reputation for you. And this is how you repay me. By stealing from our future to impress some girl who is barely legal." The employees were huddled in their cubicles, terrified. This was the perfect family, the golden couple unraveling in real time. That was when my mother arrived. She had been in the building for a board meeting. She rushed into the office not to comfort Ashley but to silence her. My mother grabbed Ashley's arm, her grip tight and bruising. "Stop it right now," my mother hissed, her voice low and dangerous. "Lower your voice. Do you want the whole city to know our business?" "Let go of me," Ashley yelled, trying to pull away. "Your son is a cheater and a thief." My mother slapped her. It was a sharp, crisp sound that silenced the room. "Pull yourself together," my mother said, her eyes cold. "Men make mistakes. It is the woman's job to hold the family together. We are in the middle of a lawsuit. If you make a scene now, if you leave him now, we lose everything. Do you understand? We lose the house. We lose the cars. We lose the company. Is your pride worth being poor, Ashley? Ashley froze. The word poor hit her harder than the slap. She looked at Marcus, who was cowering behind his desk adjusting his tie. She looked at my mother, who was looking at her with disdain. She realized then that she was trapped. She had married into a family of vipers, and she had become one of them. Fine, Ashley whispered, wiping the blood from her lip. But I want access to the accounts. I want to see every penny. We will discuss this at home, my mother said, smoothing her skirt. Now fix your face. We have a meeting with Vance in an hour. Ashley stormed out of the office, grabbing her purse. She walked past the staring employees, her head high, but her hands shaking. She got into the elevator and pressed the button for the parking garage. But she did not go home. I tracked her GPS signal. She drove to a quiet cafe in Buckhead. She sat in her car for 10 minutes, just staring at the steering wheel. Then she made a call. It was not to Marcus. It was not to her parents. I tapped into the audio from her car's Bluetooth system, a little trick Elias had taught me. I listened as the phone rang. Law offices of Steinberg and Cohen. A voice answered. I need to speak to David Steinberg, Ashley said, her voice trembling, but determined. It is urgent. I need to open a file. What kind of file, Mrs. King? The receptionist asked. Asset protection, Ashley said. And divorce planning. But it has to be completely off the books. My husband cannot know. I need to know how to shield my personal assets if his company goes bankrupt. And I need to know if I can sue him for marital fraud. I sat back in my chair, a dark smile spreading across my face. The cracks were forming. The unified front was crumbling. Ashley was looking for a lifeboat. She knew the ship was sinking and she was preparing to push Marcus overboard to save herself. But the most dangerous part was what happened next. After she hung up with the divorce lawyer, she called Marcus. Her voice was completely different. It was sweet, cloying, and fake. Baby, I am so sorry, she said. I just lost my temper. I know you love me. Mom is right. We have to stick together to beat Sophia. Once we get her land and send her to jail, we can take a vacation and fix us. I love you. I love you too, honey, Marcus replied, sounding relieved and pathetic. I promise it was a mistake. Let's focus on the trial. Let's destroy Sophia, and then everything will be perfect. I hung up the headset. They were fractured, they were bleeding, but they were still standing. In fact, their desperation made them more dangerous. Ashley was not staying because she loved him. She was staying because she needed to secure the payout from my destruction before she filed for divorce. She needed me to lose so she could win. They had formed a suicide pact bound by greed and hatred. They thought they could patch up the holes in their sinking ship with my blood. But they didn't know I was the one controlling the ocean. I looked at the pile of documents on my desk. The diamond ring was just the beginning. I picked up the next file. It was labeled Offshore Holdings. Let's see what happens when I take away their lifeboats, I whispered to the empty room. I packed up my laptop. Tomorrow was the first day of the trial. They would walk in holding hands, presenting a united front of Christian family values. But I knew the truth. I knew that every time Ashley looked at Marcus, she saw a traitor. And I knew that every time Marcus looked at Ashley, he saw a liability. All I had to do was apply a little more pressure, and they would tear each other apart right in front of the judge. The real show was just beginning. The courtroom buzzed with the low hum of anticipation as Arthur Henderson wiped a bead of sweat from his receding hairline. He looked less like a senior vice president of a major bank and more like a man standing on a trap door waiting for the lever to be pulled. I watched him from the defense table. I knew Arthur. He was a man who valued comfort and status above integrity. He had approved loans for my father based on handshakes and golf games rather than credit scores. Now he was the only thing standing between me and prison. Elias Thorne did not rush. He walked to the podium with a slow, deliberate gait, placing his battered leather satchel on the wood with a heavy thud. He looked at the jury, then at the judge, and finally rested his gaze on the trembling banker. "Mr. Henderson." Elias began, his voice deceptively mild. "You have sworn to tell the truth. Let us discuss the mechanisms of the transfers in question. You stated earlier that the digital credentials used to authorize these withdrawals belong to Sophia King. Is that correct?" "Yes," Arthur stammered, his eyes darting toward the plaintiff's table where my brother Marcus sat rigid as a stone. "The user ID and the password used were assigned to Miss Sophia King, and because her credentials were used, the bank automatically flagged these transactions as authorized by her." "That is standard protocol," Arthur said, gaining a little confidence. "We rely on the security of the unique login identifiers." Vance, the family lawyer, leaned back in his chair with a smug smile. He thought this was the nail in my coffin. To the layman, it sounded simple. My password, my crime. I could feel the eyes of the jury shifting toward me, their expressions hardening. My mother let out a soft, audible sigh, shaking her head as if she were praying for my soul. But I was not looking at the jury. I was looking at Elias. I leaned over and tugged on the sleeve of his tweed jacket. He bent down, his ear close to my lips. "Ask him about the geolocation tags," I whispered, my voice barely audible. "Ask him about the IP address on the night of the 12th. Elias straightened up. He did not nod. He simply turned back to the witness, his demeanor shifting from a confused old man to a shark-smelling blood. "Mr. Henderson," Elias said, his voice sharpening. "You are a man of technology, are you not? You understand how the internet works." "I suppose so," Arthur said, looking confused by the pivot. "Then you are aware that every computer connected to the internet has a unique address. A fingerprint, if you will. It is called an IP address." "Yes, I know what an IP address is," Arthur snapped, annoyed. "Good," Elias said. "Now King Foundations uses a secure server for all financial transactions. That server logs the IP address of every login attempt. We subpoenaed those logs, Mr. Henderson." Elias picked up a piece of paper from his table. It was a single sheet of printout, highlighting one line in yellow. "On the night of May 12th at 11:42 p.m., a transfer of $200,000 was initiated using Sophia King's login credentials." "That is what I said," Arthur interrupted. "She did it." Elias held up a hand. "Please let me finish. We traced the IP address of that login. It did not come from the King Foundation's office. It did not come from Sophia King's apartment. In fact, it did not come from any device registered to my client." Elias walked closer to the witness stand, holding the paper up for Arthur to see. "Do you recognize this IP address, Mr. Henderson? It is 192.168.0.1. It is a residential static IP provided by Comcast Xfinity." Arthur squinted at the paper. He swallowed hard. The silence in the room was absolute. Even the stenographer stopped typing for a split second. I don't memorize IP addresses," Arthur whispered. "Let me refresh your memory," Elias said, slamming the paper down on the railing. "This IP address is registered to a private residence at 442 Oakwood Drive. Does that address sound familiar to you?" Arthur looked at the paper. Then he looked at Marcus. The look of panic on Marcus's face was primal. "Mr. Henderson," Elias barked, "who lives at 442 Oakwood Drive? It is the residence of Marcus King." Arthur said, his voice barely a squeak. A collective gasp swept through the courtroom. It started from the back row and rolled forward like a wave. The reporters began furiously typing on their phones. My mother stopped praying and grabbed my father's arm. My father's face went from pale to a deep, alarming shade of purple. Elias did not let up. "So let me get this straight. You are telling this court that Sophia King broke into her brother's house in the middle of the night while he was home just to use his Wi-Fi to steal money from her own company?" Or is it more likely that the person who lives in that house, the person who owns that computer, simply used her password to frame her? Objection, Vance shouted, jumping to his feet. Calls for speculation. Sustained, Judge Davis said, but his eyes were locked on Marcus. The damage was already done. The seed of doubt had not just been planted, it had grown into a forest. Elias turned back to the banker. One more thing, Mr. Henderson. You said earlier that Marcus King called you to verify the transaction. Did he call you from the office? No, Arthur admitted, looking down at his hands. He called from his cell phone. And did he mention that his sister was with him at his house at midnight? No, Arthur said. He said he was working late from home and needed to push the payment through for an emergency supplier. Thank you, Elias said. No further questions. As Elias walked back to the table, the courtroom erupted into chaos. The murmur of the crowd grew into a roar. Ashley. My sister-in-law turned to Marcus. I could see her lips moving. She was not whispering words of support. She was screaming. You told me you were at the office that night. I read her lips perfectly. Marcus was shaking. His carefully constructed facade of the aggrieved CEO was crumbling. He looked at the jury, who were now looking at him with open suspicion. He looked at the judge, whose face was a mask of cold fury. He realized he was losing control of the narrative. Suddenly Marcus stood up. He did not wait for his lawyer. He did not wait for permission. She hacked me, Marcus screamed, pointing a trembling finger at me. His voice cracked high and hysterical. That is what she does. She is a data witch. She hacked my Wi-Fi. She sat in the driveway in her car and hacked my router to make it look like me. Marcus, sit down. Vance hissed, grabbing his arm. No, let go of me, Marcus yelled, shaking him off. I am the victim here. She is setting me up. She planted that IP address. She is a criminal mastermind. Judge Davis slammed his gavel. It sounded like a gunshot in the enclosed space. Mr. King, you will sit down and be silent, or I will hold you in contempt, the judge bellowed. But Marcus was past the point of reason. The pressure of the gambling debts, the lies, the fear of losing his lifestyle, it all boiled over. You don't understand, Marcus shouted, his eyes wild. She knows everything. She watches everything. She is the one who stole the money. Why would I steal my own money? It is my company, Judge Davis signaled to the bailiff. Bailiff, remove Mr. King from the courtroom until he can compose himself, the judge ordered. Two large officers moved toward the plaintiff's table. Marcus looked at them, then at his wife. Ashley recoiled from him, pulling her expensive handbag closer to her body as if he were contagious. It is a trick, Marcus screamed as the bailiffs grabbed his arms. It is a computer trick. She faked it. As they dragged him out the side door, kicking and shouting about hackers and conspiracies, the courtroom fell into a stunned silence. All eyes turned to me. I sat perfectly still, my face impassive. I did not smile. I did not gloat. I simply adjusted my glasses and looked at Arthur Henderson, who was now weeping softly on the witness stand. Elias leaned over to me. Well, he whispered. That went well. I looked at the empty chair where my brother had been sitting. He just gave us the opening, I said quietly. Now let's drive the truck through it. Call my mother to the stand. The courtroom buzzed with the low hum of anticipation as Arthur Henderson wiped a bead of sweat from his receding hairline. He looked less like a senior vice president of a major bank and more like a man standing on a trap door, waiting for the lever to be pulled. I watched him from the defense table. I knew Arthur. He was a man who valued comfort and status above integrity. He had approved loans for my father based on handshakes and golf games rather than credit scores. Now he was the only thing standing between me and prison. Elias Thorne did not rush. He walked to the podium with a slow, deliberate gait, placing his battered leather satchel on the wood with a heavy thud. He looked at the jury, then at the judge, and finally rested his gaze on the trembling banker. Mr. Henderson. Elias began, his voice deceptively mild. You have sworn to tell the truth. Let us discuss the mechanisms of the transfers in question. You stated earlier that the digital credentials used to authorize these withdrawals belong to Sophia King. Is that correct?
Yes.
Arthur stammered, his eyes darting toward the plaintiff's table where my brother Marcus sat rigid as a stone. The user ID and the password used were assigned to Miss Sophia King. And because her credentials were used, the bank automatically flagged these transactions as authorized by her. That is standard protocol, Arthur said, gaining a little confidence. We rely on the security of the unique login identifiers. Vance, the family lawyer, leaned back in his chair with a smug smile. He thought this was the nail in my coffin. To the layman, it sounded simple. My password. My crime. I could feel the eyes of the jury shifting toward me, their expressions hardening. My mother let out a soft, audible sigh, shaking her head as if she were praying for my soul. But I was not looking at the jury. I was looking at Elias. I leaned over and tugged on the sleeve of his tweed jacket. He bent down his ear close to my lips. Ask him about the geolocation tags, I whispered, my voice barely audible. Ask him about the IP address on the night of the 12th. Elias straightened up. He did not nod. He simply turned back to the witness, his demeanor shifting from a confused old man to a shark smelling blood. Mr. Henderson, Elias said, his voice sharpening. You are a man of technology, are you not? You understand how the internet works. I suppose so, Arthur said, looking confused by the pivot. Then you are aware that every computer connected to the internet has a unique address. A fingerprint, if you will. It is called an IP address. Yes, I know what an IP address is, Arthur snapped, annoyed. Good, Elias said. Now King Foundations uses a secure server for all financial transactions. That server logs the IP address of every login attempt. We subpoenaed those logs, Mr. Henderson. Elias picked up a piece of paper from his table. It was a single sheet of printout highlighting one line in yellow. On the night of May 12th at 11:42 p.m., a transfer of $200,000 was initiated using Sophia King's login credentials. That is what I said, Arthur interrupted. She did it. Elias held up a hand. Please let me finish. We traced the IP address of that login. It did not come from the King Foundation's office. It did not come from Sophia King's apartment. In fact, it did not come from any device registered to my client. Elias walked closer to the witness stand, holding the paper up for Arthur to see. Do you recognize this IP address, Mr. Henderson? It is 192.168.001. It is a residential static IP provided by Comcast Xfinity. Arthur squinted at the paper. He swallowed hard. The silence in the room was absolute. Even the stenographer stopped typing for a split second. I don't memorize IP addresses, Arthur whispered. Let me refresh your memory, Elias said, slamming the paper down on the railing. This IP address is registered to a private residence at 442 Oakwood Drive. Does that address sound familiar to you? Arthur looked at the paper. Then he looked at Marcus. The look of panic on Marcus's face was primal. Mr. Henderson, Elias barked. Who lives at 442 Oakwood Drive? It is the residence of Marcus King, Arthur said, his voice barely a squeak. A collective gasp swept through the courtroom. It started from the back row and rolled forward like a wave. The reporters began furiously typing on their phones. My mother stopped praying and grabbed my father's arm. My father's face went from pale to a deep, alarming shade of purple. Elias did not let up. So, let me get this straight. You are telling this court that Sophia King broke into her brother's house in the middle of the night while he was home just to use his Wi-Fi to steal money from her own company? Or is it more likely that the person who lives in that house, the person who owns that computer, simply used her password to frame her? Objection, Vance shouted, jumping to his feet. Calls for speculation. Sustained, Judge Davis said, but his eyes were locked on Marcus. The damage was already done. The seed of doubt had not just been planted, it had grown into a forest. Elias turned back to the banker. One more thing, Mr. Henderson. You said earlier that Marcus King called you to verify the transaction. Did he call you from the office? No, Arthur admitted, looking down at his hands. He called from his cell phone. And did he mention that his sister was with him at his house at midnight? No, Arthur said. He said he was working late from home and needed to push the payment through for an emergency supplier. Thank you, Elias said. No further questions. As Elias walked back to the table, the courtroom erupted into chaos. The murmur of the crowd grew into a roar. Ashley, my sister-in-law, turned to Marcus. I could see her lips moving. She was not whispering words of support, she was screaming. You told me you were at the office that night. I read her lips perfectly. Marcus was shaking. His carefully constructed facade of the aggrieved CEO was crumbling. He looked at the jury, who were now looking at him with open suspicion. He looked at the judge, whose face was a mask of cold fury. He realized he was losing control of the narrative. Suddenly, Marcus stood up. He did not wait for his lawyer. He did not wait for permission. "She hacked me!" Marcus screamed, pointing a trembling finger at me. His voice cracked high and hysterical. "That is what she does. She is a data witch. She hacked my Wi-Fi. She sat in the driveway in her car and hacked my router to make it look like me." "Marcus, sit down," Vance hissed, grabbing his arm. "No, let go of me," Marcus yelled, shaking him off. "I am the victim here. She is setting me up. She planted that IP address. She is a criminal mastermind." Judge Davis slammed his gavel. It sounded like a gunshot in the enclosed space. "Mr. King, you will sit down and be silent, or I will hold you in contempt," the judge bellowed. But Marcus was past the point of reason. The pressure of the gambling debts, the lies, the fear of losing his lifestyle, it all boiled over. "You don't understand," Marcus shouted, his eyes wild. "She knows everything. She watches everything. She is the one who stole the money. Why would I steal my own money? It is my company." Judge Davis signaled to the bailiff. "Bailiff, remove Mr. King from the courtroom until he can compose himself," the judge ordered. Two large officers moved toward the plaintiff's table. Marcus looked at them, then at his wife. Ashley recoiled from him, pulling her expensive handbag closer to her body, as if he were contagious. "It is a trick," Marcus screamed as the bailiffs grabbed his arms. "It is a computer trick." She faked it. As they dragged him out the side door, kicking and shouting about hackers and conspiracies, the courtroom fell into a stunned silence. All eyes turned to me. I sat perfectly still, my face impassive. I did not smile. I did not gloat. I simply adjusted my glasses and looked at Arthur Henderson, who was now weeping softly on the witness stand. Elias leaned over to me. "Well," he whispered, "that went well." I looked at the empty chair where my brother had been sitting. "He just gave us the opening," I said quietly. "Now let's drive the truck through it. Call my mother to the stand." The silence that followed my mother's testimony was heavy and suffocating, the kind of silence that usually precedes a funeral. My father, Samuel King, watched me with a look of grim satisfaction from his wheelchair. He believed the war was over. He believed that my mother's tears had washed away the facts and left only their twisted version of the truth. But Elias Thorne did not look like a man who had lost. He stood up slowly, smoothing the wrinkles in his tweed jacket, and walked to the center of the courtroom with a spring in his step that belied his disheveled appearance. He did not look at the jury. He did not look at the weeping mother. He looked directly at my father. "Your Honor, the defense calls Samuel King to the stand," Elias announced, his voice ringing out with a surprising clarity. A murmur went through the gallery. It was unusual to call the plaintiff, especially one who was claiming to be knocking on death's door, but Judge Davis nodded. My father wheeled himself to the witness stand, playing the role of the frail patriarch to perfection. He adjusted his oxygen tube, though I knew his oxygen levels were perfectly fine, and placed his hand on the Bible. He swore to tell the truth, a concept he had abandoned years ago. Elias leaned against the railing, looking less like a high-powered attorney, and more like a curious neighbor asking about the weather. "Mr. King," Elias began pleasantly, "we have heard a lot today about betrayal, about how your daughter allegedly stole from you. But I want to talk about the company itself. King Foundations. It is quite a legacy you have built." My father straightened his spine, his chest puffing out slightly. "It is," my father said, his voice deep and resonant. "I built it from the ground up, brick by brick. It is a symbol of excellence in this city." Elias nodded, flipping through a file on his table. "Excellence, yes. But even excellent companies have hard times. Let us look at the year 2019. According to these bank records, King Foundations was not just struggling, it was insolvent. You had $3 million in debt, your credit lines were maxed out, and the bank was 3 days away from seizing your equipment. Is that correct? My father's eyes narrowed. He hated admitting weakness. It was a difficult market, my father sniffed. The economy was down. We had cash flow issues. Every business goes through it. Of course, Elias said. But you did not go under. In fact, just 48 hours before the bank was set to foreclose, a miracle happened. You received an injection of capital, $2 million to be exact. It saved the company. It saved your house. It saved your reputation. My father smiled, a smug expression returning to his face. Yes, God provided. We secured a private investment. Elias picked up a document from his stack. He walked over to the witness stand and placed it in front of my father. This is the loan agreement for that capital injection, Elias said. The lender is listed as Phoenix Holdings, a private equity firm. That is correct, my father said, glancing at the paper with disinterest. Now this agreement is quite unique, Mr. King. Elias continued pacing back and forth. Usually when a company is that deep in debt, investors demand control. They demand board seats. They demand to fire the CEO. But Phoenix Holdings did not do that. They gave you the money, they cleared your debts, and they let you keep running the show. They let you stay the boss. They let Marcus keep his title. They asked for nothing but a standard interest rate and preferred stock options. My father nodded vigorously. Because they believed in me, he said arrogantly. They saw the value of the King name. They knew I was the only man who could steer the ship. They were very generous, Elias noted, almost like a guardian angel, or perhaps a silent partner who cared more about your dignity than profit. My father scoffed. It was business. Smart business. Elias stopped pacing. He turned and looked at me sitting alone at the defense table. Then he turned back to my father. Mr. King, you have spent the last 3 days telling this court that your daughter Sophia is a thief. You said she is greedy. You said she hates you. You said she wanted to destroy the company. She does. My father spat, gripping the arms of his wheelchair. Look at her. She is sitting there cold as ice. She tried to bankrupt us. And yet Elias interrupted his voice, raising a decibel. At the exact same time you claim she was stealing this mysterious company, Phoenix Holdings was saving you. While you say Sophia was taking money out, Phoenix was pouring money in. That is the difference between a criminal and a professional, my father said, gesturing to the jury. Sophia is a parasite. Phoenix Holdings is a savior. Elias walked closer to the witness stand. He was now standing inside my father's personal space. The friendly neighbor persona was gone. The shark had surfaced. Tell me, Mr. King, do you know who owns Phoenix Holdings? My father blinked. He looked confused by the question. I have never met them in person, he admitted. We dealt through intermediaries, lawyers. It is a blind trust. So you have never spoken to the chairman of the board of the company that owns 80% of your debt? No, my father said, sounding defensive. It is common in high finance. Investors like privacy. Elias leaned in his face inches from my father's. But surely you must have a theory. Who would lend $2 million to a sinking ship without asking for control? Who would save you when every bank in Atlanta had turned their back on you? My father laughed. It was a harsh, dismissive sound. It was obviously someone who respects me, he declared, looking at the jury to ensure they heard him. It was probably one of my old golf buddies, maybe Senator Williams, or perhaps a foreign investor who admires my work. Someone with class, someone with honor, someone who understands what it means to build a legacy. Elias stood up straight. He looked at the ceiling, then back at my father. So in your mind, the person behind Phoenix Holdings is a friend, a peer, someone good? Absolutely, my father said. They are the best kind of partner. They saved my family. Unlike that ungrateful child sitting over there. He pointed a shaking finger at me. She tried to ruin me. My father said, his voice trembling with fake emotion. She tried to put me in the grave. Thank God for Phoenix Holdings. Thank God for people who actually have a heart. I watched my father speak. I watched him praise the very entity he was suing. I watched him worship the hand that fed him, completely unaware that he was about to bite it off. A strange calmness settled over me. It was the calm of a sniper who has waited 3 days in the snow for the perfect shot and finally sees the target walk into the crosshairs. Elias Thorne walked back to the defense table. He picked up a thick leather-bound binder. It was not a court document. It was the corporate charter for Phoenix Holdings. He held it in his hands like a holy relic. He turned to the judge. "Your Honor," Elias said, his voice dropping to a whisper that carried to the back of the room. "The plaintiff has testified that Phoenix Holdings is a benevolent force. He has testified that the owner is a person of honor who saved his company. He has testified that this entity is the opposite of the defendant." Elias turned to face the gallery. He looked at Marcus, who was standing by the door having snuck back in. He looked at Ashley, who was chewing her fingernails. He looked at my mother. "We agree with the plaintiff," Elias said, a small, dangerous smile playing on his lips. "Phoenix Holdings did save the company. Phoenix Holdings is the only reason the King family is not living on the street today." He walked back to my father. "Mr. King, you said the owner must be a good friend. A person of class." "I did," my father said, looking uneasy for the first time. Elias opened the binder. He pulled out a single sheet of paper. It was the Articles of Incorporation. "Then let us introduce you to your best friend," Elias said softly. "Let us see exactly who you have been praising for the last 5 minutes." He handed the document to my father. "Read the name on the bottom line. Mr. King. Read the name of the sole shareholder and chairman of Phoenix Holdings." My father looked down. He squinted. He adjusted his glasses. I watched the color drain from his face. It started at his chin and moved up to his forehead, leaving him gray and ashen. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. His hands began to shake so violently, the paper rattled like a dry leaf in a hurricane. "Read it," Elias commanded, his voice booming like thunder. My father looked up at me. His eyes were wide with horror. It wasn't anger anymore. It was terror. He looked at the daughter he had called a failure. He looked at the woman he had tried to imprison, and for the first time in his life, he saw me. He couldn't speak. The paper fell from his hands and fluttered to the floor. Elias picked it up. He turned to the jury. "Since the witness seems to have lost his voice," Elias said, holding the paper up, "I will read it for the record. The sole owner, founder, and chairman of Phoenix Holdings, the company that owns the mortgage on Mr. King's house, the lien on his car, and the controlling interest in his business, is Sophia King." The silence broke. It didn't break with a murmur. It broke with a collective gasp that sucked the air out of the room. Judge Davis dropped his pen. Vance slumped in his chair. And I just sat there looking at my father, and finally, for the first time in 8 years, I smiled. The revelation that I was the chairman of Phoenix Holdings hung in the air like smoke after an explosion. My father was still staring at the floor, his mouth working silently as he tried to reconcile the image of his failure daughter with the financial titan who owned his debt. But Elias Thorne was not a man to leave a wounded animal suffering in the field. He believed in clean, decisive ends. He walked back to the defense table and picked up a heavy black binder. It made a loud thud when he dropped it onto the witness stand right in front of my father. "Your Honor," Elias said, his voice cutting through the stunned silence of the courtroom. "The defense would like to enter Exhibit 1 into evidence. This is the master loan agreement signed by Samuel King, Marcus King, and the board of directors of King Foundations 3 years ago." Judge Davis looked over his spectacles. "Proceed, Mr. Thorne." Elias opened the binder. He turned the pages with a slow, deliberate rhythm, letting the sound echo in the quiet room. "Mr. King," Elias said to my father, who was now trembling visibly, "when you accepted the $2 million lifeline from Phoenix Holdings, you signed a comprehensive collateral agreement. Do you recall the terms of that collateral?" My father looked up. His eyes were glassy. I didn't read the fine print, he whispered. The lawyers handled it. We just needed the cash. Elias nodded sympathetically, but his eyes were cold. Let me refresh your memory. Clause 4, Section B. To secure this high-risk loan, King Foundations pledged all tangible and intangible assets as collateral. Elias pointed to a list on the page. That includes the commercial headquarters on Peachtree Street. That includes the fleet of construction vehicles. That includes the family home in Buckhead. And most interestingly, that includes the personal guarantees of the executive officers, meaning Mr. Marcus King's private residence and his personal vehicle. Marcus stood up in the gallery. His face was gray. What he croaked. That is not true. My house is in Ashley's name. Elias turned to face him. Actually, Marcus, Elias said pleasantly, you refinanced your house 2 years ago to cover some gambling losses, didn't you? And you used the company as a guarantor. That tied your home to the corporate debt. It is all right here on page 42. Ashley let out a small, strangled cry. She pulled away from Marcus as if he were radioactive, so Elias continued, turning back to the judge. To be clear, Phoenix Holdings currently holds the first lien position on literally everything the King family owns. If the company defaults on this loan, Phoenix Holdings has the right to seize all assets immediately. No court order required, just a signature from the chairman. My father looked at me. He looked at the daughter he had just called a parasite. He realized that the roof over his head, the bed he slept in, the wheelchair he sat in, it all belonged to me. But we didn't default, my father stammered, finding a shred of his old arrogance. We have made every interest payment on time. You can't touch us. We are current. Elias smiled. It was the smile of a man who had just checked the king in 3 moves. That brings us to Exhibit 2, Elias said, producing a single sheet of paper with a red seal on it. He walked over to the jury box, holding the paper up for them to see. This is the Covenants and Conditions Clause of the loan agreement. It is standard in high-risk lending. It is called the Bad Boy Guarantee. Elias turned to my father. Mr. King, would you please read the highlighted paragraph? Clause 7, Section D, the default event. My father shook his head. I can't, he wheezed. I left my reading glasses. Allow me, Elias said. He began to read, his voice booming. The loan shall be considered an immediate default if the borrower, King Foundations, or any of its executive officers are found to be involved in any act of fraud, embezzlement, misappropriation of funds, or are the subject of a criminal investigation regarding financial misconduct. Upon such an event, the full balance of the loan becomes due immediately, and the lender reserves the right to take immediate possession of all collateral. Elias lowered the paper. He let the words hang there. Fraud. Embezzlement. Misappropriation. He walked over to the empty witness chair where Marcus had sat earlier. Now let's review what has happened in this courtroom today, Elias said, pacing like a tiger. The plaintiff, sir, Marcus King, stood right here and testified under oath that $5 million was stolen from the company. He admitted that a crime took place. He admitted that the financial records were falsified. Elias turned to Arthur Henderson, the banker who was still sitting in the front row looking like he wanted to vanish. And Mr. Henderson testified that the IP address used to move that stolen money came from the home of Marcus King. Elias walked back to my father. So, Mr. King, here is your dilemma. If Sophia stole the money as you claim, then your company has been the victim of massive internal fraud, which triggers the default clause. If Marcus stole the money, as the evidence suggests, then your CEO committed fraud, which triggers the default clause. Elias slammed the binder shut. Either way, gentlemen, you just walked into court and confessed to the very conditions that allow Phoenix Holdings to foreclose on you. You didn't just sue your creditor. You handed her the keys to your house. Marcus let out a sound that was half scream, half sob. He slumped against the wall, sliding down until he hit the floor. He realized what he had done. by trying to frame me by making up this elaborate story of theft to cover his own tracks. He had activated the nuclear option in the contract he never bothered to read. Ashley stood up. She looked at Marcus on the floor. She looked at me. She didn't scream this time. She didn't cry. She simply picked up her purse, took off her wedding ring, and dropped it onto the bench. She walked out of the courtroom without looking back. She knew how to read a contract. She knew it was over. My father looked at me. His eyes were pleading now. "Sophia," he whispered. "You wouldn't. We are family." I looked at him. I remembered the rain. I remembered the text messages. I remembered my mother on the stand lying about Christmas Eve. Elias looked at me waiting for the signal. "Your Honor," Elias said. "Based on the admission of fraud by the plaintiffs themselves, Phoenix Holdings is hereby exercising its right to accelerate the debt. We are moving for an immediate dismissal of the case against Sophia King and an order granting possession of the collateral to the lender." "Objection!" Vance screamed, jumping up. "This is a surprise tactic. We need time to review these documents. This is highly irregular." Judge Davis slammed his gavel. Bang! 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 "Order," the judge bellowed. "Order in this court." The room fell silent save for the sound of Marcus weeping on the floor. Judge Davis looked at Vance. He looked at my father. And then he looked at me. There was a glimmer of something new in his eyes. Respect. "Mr. Vance," the judge said, his voice steel. "These documents appear to be notarized and signed by your clients. If the terms are what Mr. Thorne says they are, then your clients have effectively sued themselves into bankruptcy." The judge reached out his hand. "Bring me the file, Mr. Thorne. I want to read every single word of this default clause before I rule." Elias handed the file to the bailiff, who walked it up to the bench. Judge Davis put on his glasses. He opened the file. The rustling of the pages was the only sound in the room. Every turn of the page felt like a shovel of dirt hitting the coffin of the King family legacy. I watched my father. He was holding his chest, but this time he wasn't faking. He was watching his empire dissolve in the hands of a man in a black robe, all because he underestimated the daughter he threw away. I sat back in my chair and crossed my arms. The trap was sprung. The iron doors were closing. And I held the only key. Judge Davis sat behind the high wooden bench for what felt like an eternity. The only sound in the packed courtroom was the rustling of paper as he turned the pages of the loan agreement one by one. I watched him closely. I knew exactly what he was reading. He was reading the clause that gave Phoenix Holdings the right to seize every single asset of King Foundations upon a finding of fraud. He was reading the signature page where my father and brother had unknowingly signed their lives away to me 3 years ago. Marcus was standing near the plaintiff table, wiping sweat from his forehead with a handkerchief that was already soaked. He looked like a man standing on a gallows, waiting for the trapdoor to open, but hoping against hope for a pardon. My father gripped the armrests of his wheelchair so tightly his knuckles were white. Vance, their expensive lawyer, had stopped taking notes. He was just staring at the wall, a look of dawning horror on his face as he realized he had been outmaneuvered not by another lawyer, but by the very defendant he had mocked in his opening statement. Finally, Judge Davis closed the file. The sound was soft, but in the silence of the room it sounded like a gunshot. He took off his reading glasses and folded them slowly, placing them on top of the binder. He did not look at the jury. He did not look at the gallery. He looked directly at Marcus King. "Mr. King," the judge said, his voice terrifyingly calm. "I have a question for you, and I want you to think very carefully before you answer." Marcus swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing. "Yes, Your Honor. You brought this lawsuit against your sister claiming she embezzled $5 million from King Foundations. You claimed she was stealing from the family. You claimed she was destroying the company. Is that still your testimony?" "Yes," Marcus stammered, though his voice lacked its usual arrogance. "She took the money." The judge nodded slowly. He picked up the file again and tapped it with his index finger. "Here is where I am confused, Mr. King. According to Exhibit 1, which your own lawyer just stipulated is authentic, the company known as Phoenix Holdings owns 100% of the preferred stock of King Foundations. They also hold the controlling voting rights. And they hold the mortgage on all corporate and personal assets of the executive officers. So what Marcus said, finding a spark of defiance. They are just investors. They don't run the day-to-day. The judge leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. Mr. King, do you understand how corporate ownership works? If Phoenix Holdings owns the controlling interest, and if they hold the debt that keeps your doors open, then for all intents and purposes, Phoenix Holdings is the owner of King Foundations. They own the building, they own the trucks, they own the bank accounts, and most importantly, they own the capital. Marcus blinked, looking confused. I don't see your point. The point, the judge said, his voice rising slightly, is that you are accusing Sophia King of stealing from a company that is owned by Phoenix Holdings. Yes, Marcus said. That is what I said. Judge Davis sighed. He looked at me, then back at Marcus. Mr. King, did you never bother to ask who the chairman of Phoenix Holdings was? Did you never wonder who was signing the checks that saved your business from bankruptcy? It was a blind trust, Marcus mumbled. Dad said it was a friend. The judge opened the file to the last page. He turned it around so Marcus could see it. He pointed to the signature at the bottom. This is the incorporation document for Phoenix Holdings, the judge announced, his voice booming through the courtroom. The sole shareholder, the chairman of the board, the owner of the debt, the owner of the assets. The person who effectively owns you, Mr. King, is Sophia King. The air left the room. It wasn't a gasp this time. It was a vacuum. Marcus stared at the document. His mouth fell open. His eyes bulged. He looked from the paper to me, and for the first time, the math finally worked in his head. Judge Davis continued, his voice dripping with incredulity. So let me get this straight. You are standing here telling me that Sophia King stole money from herself. You are telling me that the owner of the company stole her own capital. And worse, you are admitting that you, the employee, took $200,000 of company funds to gamble online. The judge paused, shaking his head in disbelief. Mr. King, you are suing your boss for the privilege of telling her how she spends her own money. And in the process, you have admitted to embezzling funds from the very person who holds the mortgage on your house. The courtroom exploded. It was absolute pandemonium. Reporters were shouting into their phones. The jury was whispering furiously. Marcus stood frozen, looking like he had been struck by lightning. That is impossible, he whispered. She is broke. She drives a Honda. Judge Davis slammed his gavel, but no one was listening. Mr. Vance, the judge, barked. Do you have any explanation for why you have wasted this court's time by having a man sue his employer for theft? Robert Vance, the shark of Atlanta. The man who had never lost a high-profile case did not stand up. He did not object. He simply closed his laptop with a definitive snap. He started packing his briefcase. I am done, Your Honor. Vance said, his voice flat. I withdraw as counsel. My client lied to me about the corporate structure. I am not going down with this ship. You can't leave, Marcus screamed, grabbing Vance's arm. Fix this! Get off me, Vance snarled, shoving Marcus away. You moron! You just confessed to grand larceny in front of a judge and you sued the woman who owns your house. There is nothing to fix. You are finished. It was then that the reality hit Ashley. My sister-in-law, who had been sitting in the front row calculating her divorce settlement, suddenly realized what this meant. If Phoenix Holdings owned the debt, and if Phoenix Holdings was seizing the assets due to fraud, there was no marital money left. There was no house. There was no car. There was no alimony. Sophia owned it all. Ashley let out a shriek that sounded like a banshee. She didn't look at me. She looked at Marcus. You idiot, she screamed. You told me we were rich. You told me the company was ours. Ashley, wait. Marcus pleaded, backing away. You ruined me, Ashley yelled. She lunged at him. It happened in slow motion. Ashley, in her designer dress and pearls, leaped over the railings separating the gallery from the council tables. She landed on Marcus, her fingernails clawing at his face. They fell to the floor in a tangle of limbs. Marcus was screaming for help, as his wife, the woman who had conspired with him to destroy me, tore at his expensive suit. Get her off me, Marcus shrieked. She is crazy. Bailiffs rushed in, trying to pull them apart. It was a scene of utter degradation. The golden couple of Atlanta rolling on the dirty floor of a courtroom, fighting like alley cats, while the cameras flashed. But the chaos wasn't over. I looked over at my parents. My father was staring at me, his face a mask of pure terror. He clutched his chest. This time there was no theatricality. His eyes rolled back in his head. His mouth went slack. He slumped sideways in his wheelchair, sliding out and hitting the floor with a heavy thud. Sam, my mother screamed. She reached for him, but her own knees gave way. She collapsed right next to him, fainting from the sheer overload of shock. Medics, Judge Davis shouted, standing up. Clear the courtroom. The bailiffs finally dragged Ashley off Marcus. She was sobbing, her makeup smeared, her dress torn. Marcus was bleeding from a scratch on his cheek, cowering in the corner. My parents were lying on the floor, surrounded by emergency responders. I sat at the defense table perfectly still. Elias Thorne looked at me. He didn't smile, he just nodded. That is a wrap, he said softly. I looked at the carnage. My brother battered and exposed as a fraud. My sister-in-law revealed as a gold digger with a violent temper. My parents broken by the weight of their own lies. I felt a strange lightness in my chest. It wasn't joy. It wasn't happiness. It was the feeling of a heavy chain finally falling off my neck. I stood up. I picked up my files. I didn't look at Marcus as he was handcuffed by the bailiff for contempt and fraud. I didn't look at my parents as they were loaded onto stretchers. I walked toward the exit. The reporters parted like the Red Sea, their cameras clicking, their microphones thrust in my face. Ms. King, do you have a statement?" they shouted. I stopped at the doors. I adjusted my glasses. I looked back at the empty judge's bench at the seal of the state of Georgia. "Justice is expensive," I said to the nearest camera, "but it is worth every penny." I pushed the doors open and walked out into the sunlight. The phoenix had risen, and the King Empire had burned to ash. The chaos in the courtroom settled into a heavy, suffocating dust as the paramedics finished checking my parents' vitals. My father was pale and shaken, clutching his chest, while my mother sat on the floor, weeping softly, her perfect blue suit ruined by the grime of the courthouse tiles. Marcus was still cowering in the corner, holding a handkerchief to his bleeding cheek, where Ashley had scratched him. It was a tableau of total family destruction, and for the first time in my life, I did not feel the urge to fix it. I did not rush to get my father water. I did not comfort my mother. I stood at the defense table, gathering my papers with calm, deliberate movements. Judge Davis cleared his throat, bringing the room back to order. He looked at me with a mixture of awe and expectation. "Ms. King, the judge," said, his voice grave, "as the chairman of Phoenix Holdings, you have standing to determine the fate of the defendant company. Your brother has admitted to fraud. Your parents have defaulted on the covenants. The court is ready to issue a judgment. How do you wish to proceed?" I looked at Elias Thorne. He nodded, closing his briefcase. It was time. I turned to face the room. I did not look at the jury or the reporters. I looked directly at the people who had raised me, the people who had tried to imprison me. "Your Honor," I said, my voice steady and echoing off the mahogany walls. "For 30 years, this family has operated on the belief that appearance is everything and that the truth is flexible. They believed they could spend money they did not earn and destroy people who did not fit their image. Today, that ends." I took a deep breath, feeling the power of the words I was about to speak. As the sole secured creditor and majority shareholder of King Foundations, I am declaring the company insolvent due to gross mismanagement and executive fraud. I am exercising my right under the default clause to immediately seize all collateral to recover the $5 million stolen by Marcus King and the $2 million in outstanding loan principal. My father made a choking sound. Sophia, no, he wheezed. You can't. That is my legacy. I ignored him. I continued addressing the judge. I am ordering the immediate liquidation of all corporate assets. The headquarters on Peachtree Street will be sold. The construction fleet will be auctioned. Furthermore, I am enforcing the personal guarantees signed by Samuel and Marcus King. I turned to my father. Dad, you have 24 hours to vacate the estate in Buckhead. The locks will be changed tomorrow at noon. Anything left inside will be considered the property of Phoenix Holdings. Then I turned to Marcus. Marcus, your house is already in foreclosure as of this morning. My team is there now securing the premises. And that sports car you drove here today, the keys belong to me. You can leave them with the bailiff. Marcus stood up, his face purple with rage and terror. You can't do this, he screamed. We are your family. You are going to leave us homeless. You are going to put us on the street. You put yourself on the street, I said, cold as ice. I am just the bank, and the bank is closing your account. Judge Davis banged his gavel. Judgment is granted in favor of the defense and Phoenix Holdings. The court orders the immediate seizure of all listed assets. But the nightmare was not over for Marcus. As the civil judgment was rendered, the two officers standing by the door moved in. They were not bailiffs. They were detectives from the district attorney's office who had been sitting in the back row since Arthur Henderson's testimony. They walked up to Marcus, pulling a pair of steel handcuffs from their belts. Marcus King, the detective, announced, spinning my brother around and slamming him against the table. You are under arrest for grand larceny, wire fraud, and perjury. You have the right to remain silent. I suggest you start using it. The click of the handcuffs ratcheting tight around Marcus's wrists was the sweetest sound I had ever heard. He thrashed, looking at my father for help, but my father was too busy staring at the floor, realizing he was about to lose the roof over his head. Mom, Marcus cried out as they dragged him away. Mom, help me. My mother just sobbed, burying her face in her hands. She had testified against me to save him, and now she had lost everything. Her son was going to prison, and she was going to a homeless shelter. I picked up my bag and walked toward the center aisle. The reporters surged forward, shouting questions, their flashes blinding. I put on my dark sunglasses, shielding my eyes not from the light, but from the sight of my family's ruin. Sophia, wait. I stopped. It was Ashley. She was standing near the gate, her dress torn, her face streaked with mascara. She looked pathetic. Sophia, please, she begged, reaching out a hand. I didn't know. He lied to me too. We are sisters, Sophia. I can help you run the company. Don't take my house. Please. I have nowhere to go. I looked at her hand. The hand that had pushed my grocery basket onto the floor. The hand that had typed those hateful social media posts. You are right, Ashley, I said. You should have kept those receipts from the grocery store. You are going to need them. I walked past her, leaving her screaming my name. I walked past my father, who looked up at me with tears in his eyes. I am sorry, he whispered. Sophia, I am sorry. It was the apology I had waited a lifetime to hear. But it was too late. It wasn't an apology born of love. It was an apology born of poverty. It had no value. I kept walking. I pushed through the heavy double doors of the courthouse and stepped out into the blinding Atlanta afternoon. The air tasted sweet. It tasted like freedom. At the bottom of the concrete steps, a sleek black car was idling at the curb. It was not a taxi. It was my car. A Rolls-Royce Phantom with tinted windows and the Phoenix Holdings emblem discreetly embossed on the rim. My driver, a large man named James, who had been with me for 5 years, stepped out and opened the rear door. The crowd of reporters gasped. They looked from the battered Honda Civic being towed away in their memories to the $500,000 machine waiting for me. They realized then that the story was not about a poor girl who got lucky. It was about a queen who had been hiding in plain sight. I slid into the leather back seat. The interior smelled of expensive cedar and silence. I saw my family stumbling out of the courthouse doors behind me. My mother was supporting my father. Ashley was running down the steps, waving her arms. They were shouting, begging, trying to catch me before I disappeared. James looked at me in the rearview mirror. "Where to, Ms. King?" "Take me to the airport, James," I said. "I have a business meeting in Tokyo tomorrow." "And James?" "Yes, ma'am. Don't stop for them." James nodded. He put the car in gear. As we pulled away from the curb, I looked out the window one last time. I saw my father collapse onto the sidewalk weeping. I saw Ashley screaming at the sky. I saw the flashing lights of the police car taking Marcus away. I pressed the button on the door and the black privacy shade slid up, blocking them from my view forever. I leaned back and closed my eyes. The knot of anxiety that had lived in my stomach for 8 years uncoiled. I was alone, but I wasn't lonely. I had stripped away the dead weight. I had burned the forest down so something new could grow. I used to think I was the black sheep of the family, the outcast, the one who didn't fit. But as the Rolls-Royce merged onto the highway driving toward a horizon that belonged entirely to me, I realized I had been wrong all along. I wasn't the black sheep. I was the wolf who had survived the winter, and now the whole world was my territory. This is Sophia King signing off. If you have ever had to burn a bridge to save yourself, tell me your story in the comments. And remember, the best revenge isn't anger, it's success. This story taught us a brutal but necessary truth. We often break our own hearts trying to gain approval from people who are committed to misunderstanding us. Sophia proved that being the black sheep isn't a badge of shame. It is a sign that you were built for a path your family cannot comprehend. Her silence wasn't weakness, it was strategy. The greatest revenge wasn't seizing the assets, but realizing she never needed their validation to be a queen. If you have ever had to burn a bridge to light your own way, hit that like button and subscribe for more stories of justice. Have you ever had to cut off toxic family to find your peace? Let me know your story in the comments below.